2024 was a year of some incredible games, some incredible blunders, and some absolute dog shit, but also some really damn good games. So many so that I genuinely had a hard time picking between the 20 or so games that I thought were worthy to potentially be on this list. But I think I finally have it narrowed down to the 10 best games of 2024. If you're new to the channel, you like gaming news, gaming reviews, and this best lists content, please subscribe and like the video if you do like what you see here. Now, let's get into the 10 best games of 2024. And for number 10, we have Dragon's Dogma 2, a game that was a sequel to a very unique RPG experience in the first game. You have systems and mechanics within the Dragon's Dogma franchise that we haven't seen in other RPGs to date. And this is kind of like a pseudo online multiplayer experience where you're not playing real time with your friends and playing real time with their characters. However, you can bring their characters as companions into your game. And these companions do a lot more in this game than any other companions will do in a other similar RPG experience. They have different personalities which you actually choose within the game that are going to kind of decide their play style as a character. They obviously have their own class as well, or their own vocation, to where you can make sure you're pairing up to these pawns in a way that you have the best group dynamic. On top of this, they can lead you to different chests or lead you to different loot in the game, or warn you if something dangerous is upcoming, or explain some mechanics to you as a character if they've seen it in their own game but you haven't seen it in your game as of yet. This is so damn cool, and you can actually utilize the experience of these other pawns and what they had to go through in their actual separate game experiences before you bring them over to your own, which can be super helpful as you're exploring this world. And when you couple this with a combat that kind of seems a lot like Monster Hunter, obviously this game is also by Capcom just like Monster Hunter, and a lot of this is definitely relatable. You have a lot of classes with similar abilities. You can climb up bosses and take out different weak points of these different enemies that you're fighting, with a combat that feels very visceral and very impactful every step of the way. And the world of Dragon's Dogma 2 is so hardcore in the most beautiful of ways, to where everything you do in this game continues to immerse you even more and more into the world as a whole. There's no fast travel in this game. You have to take an ox cart to a different city that can be attacked in the middle of the night. On top of this, if you get stuck at nighttime, there's different creatures and harder enemies that might kill you at night, specifically because of how dark it also is, so you don't necessarily know where you're going. It's a lot harder to see, so you need to make sure you're carrying torches and carrying things that can light up the darkness so you can get through to your destination in the safest way possible. And there's no auto-saving or save scumming, so when you die, you lose a lot of time and a lot of progress, which a lot of people, granted, don't necessarily like, but it makes your deaths count and makes them more meaningful. You don't want to die in this game. And this can make for some really incredible, cool-ass moments in this game. For example, when you find a griffin for the first time, and one of your pawns mentions that it's weak to fire because that pawn has fought a griffin in their world, even though you haven't fought it in yours. And then you're using fire. You hop on the griffin's back and you're trying to kill it. It takes off, flies you to a brand new area in the world where you are now in some big ass trouble. You've never been there. You don't know how to get back. You don't want to die and lose this progress. You want to make sure you kill the griffin and get the very good loot that it has in its nest. And for someone like me who didn't play the first Dragon's Dogma, these were some of the most memorable, insane experiences I've had in gaming this year. But unfortunately, I couldn't put this higher in my list, because a lot of these systems end up making the entire game as a whole seem tedious at times, when there's no fast travel to places you have already been, when your ox cart is continuously getting destroyed at night almost 80-90% of the time, when you die and you do lose that progress to something bullshit because of how kind of clunky the movement mechanics are, where you can just fall off a cliff accidentally and die. And although it is cool that there's no map markers for quests, it can be almost impossible sometimes without looking up online how to complete some of these quests because there's not enough direction. The story was unfortunately a downgrade upgrade in almost every way from the original game. And even though the exploration is so damn good the first time you go through it and the first time you're experiencing these things, to make a very magical experience almost the first time you're going through this game, when you get later on in the game, even halfway through the game, you start to just experience the same things over and over and over again. Every item that you buy at the shop is pretty much the same or better than you find out in the world. The enemy variety is the biggest issue here. It lacks so bad in enemy variety, where the second half of the game you think you're going to find all these new enemies and new bosses with the new territory you go into, and it's the same ones, just reskinned or have more armor on them or something like that, where it just makes the gameplay feel so damn stale after a while. Now luckily this is held up obviously by how damn good the combat is, but it's definitely something that took away from my overall experience from the game, because I was expecting more as I got to the second half. Now I will say they have a secret endgame here that is incredible, with big bosses that are completely new, different, and have all of these extra new mechanics, but I was longing for more because this endgame system is a time-gated system, and you pretty much have to look this up online if you're really going to find this in the first place. But overall, this was still an incredible RPG experience that brought me some of the coolest moments, like I mentioned, I've had in gaming in 2024, if not in the last decade. Unfortunately, the rest of the game just doesn't hold up. It gets a little bit too tedious, a little bit too stale to get higher up on my list here, but it's definitely still a game you should play, and when the DLC comes out for this game, just like the first game, it's set to hopefully fix a lot of these issues and make the game overall just the best experience that it can be. It's just unfortunate that this wasn't the best experience it could be in the base game. Now moving on into my number 9 spot, we have Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. And there are so many damn good things that I can say about this game, but first, the narrative, the story as a whole, how it's presented with the voice acting and the dialogue, and just in general, the animations of the characters when they're talking and when they're communicating is S-tier. The presentation and execution of this story is the best you are going to get in an RPG to date. In addition to this, the graphics and the world and the atmosphere, again, is S-tier here. It is so damn immersive when you are playing this game for the first time in 3D, or at least the second time after Final Fantasy VII Remake. It is so damn beautiful to go through the world, explore, and just get fully immersed into Final Fantasy VII like never before. In the combat here, it's obviously not turn-based like the original Final Fantasy VII. Same similar combat system brought over from Rebirth, again, this being the sequel to that game. More customization, more RPG mechanics here with the combat that I really enjoyed, and overall, I think this action combat fits this game so damn well. But with this game being this damn good, and with it being up there and favored from a lot of people to win the Game of the Year at the Game Awards, why don't I have this higher up in my list? Well, personally, I just don't think it's as impressive when a game has already been made before. This is still a remake of the initial game, and obviously they take their liberties with combat, even with story and some of the characters in some points, but these are still characters and stories that have been told before. And granted, they're remaking it in the best of possible ways, but I don't think I can give them the same credit to some other studios that have brand new ideas that are still succeeding to a similar standpoint. But obviously that doesn't take away from your overall experience when you're playing the game. It's just why I don't have it higher up in my top 10 list. A lot of people are going to probably differ from this opinion, but it's just my personal one. Now going into number 8 here, we don't have a third-person RPG. We do have a third-person shooter though in Helldivers 2. A game that I don't think anybody saw this amount of success coming when this game released. The first one had some popularity, but the second one broke everybody's expectations on how big this game was actually going to get, including the developer. But this game was just so damn good in so many different ways, and it was very unique in terms of a multiplayer co-op shooter experience from a lot of the other games out there. The feeling of dropping in for the first time with your friends to try and go save Super Earth from the aliens or the robots is a feeling that I'm probably never going to get, especially because before you drop in, when you're in your ship, you see other player ships and you see the planets that you're going to be going on already literally getting overtaken in real time on your ship. It is awesome. But when you do drop in and you're tasked with the different missions and objectives that you have, and you have this time limit, and all of the different enemies that you're fighting have different mechanics, and you have to play with your team in a different way or use different strategies. You guys all have to use different weapons and different drops that you bring into the map by doing a combination, kind of like a quick time event. All of this couples for an extremely engaging experience. Calling down bombs on a group of 30 aliens that your teammates might happen to be fighting too. Calling that out so they have to get the hell out of the way. The airdrop comes in, blows up all of the different enemies on your screen. You see how many enemies that you kill. You might also kill your teammate. See him flying across the goddamn world. It is so fun. It is so cool. It's difficult. It's challenging, but it's also fun, engaging, and it does require a lot of strategy to complete some of the harder difficulties, specifically with some of the gigantic bosses that you're fighting in the game as well. You can straight up call a real-time nuke into the game. It is incredible. And overall, if you have a team of friends to hop into this game with, this is one of the most fun co-op games you could play. Grab 2 players, hop in, and just have an absolute blast on any given night. I absolutely loved this game. I definitely am still wishing to play it more. I know there's some new updates and content coming out for it as well. I also believe a whole new enemy faction is coming out for this game. So all of that included, I'm very, very excited to hop back in. And this is easily one of my top 10 games of 2024. And I'm sorry, they're not aliens, they're bugs. Kill the bugs. Kill all the bugs. Now, going to number 7 on my top games of 2025, we have AstroBot, the game that actually won Game of the Year at the Game Awards. Whether or not you thought this game should win the Game of the Year, it's hands down one of the best games of this year regardless. This game obviously took a lot of great things from what 3D platformers have done in the past, like Mario, while also putting its own spin on it and having its own mechanics here. And there's no doubt that this game utilizes the capabilities of the PlayStation 5 better than probably any game ever has, and that's to be expected when this game is developed in-house. The gameplay is smooth as butter, man. You can go through this game with almost no glitches, no bugs, nothing, and have one of the most smooth experiences for a game in 2024. On top of this, the little motion capture that you have with your controller, they utilize better than any game. On top of this, the haptic feedback in this game is also beautiful. It really feels like a full realized version of the original AstroBot tech demo that came with the PlayStation. And on top of this, it was so great to see literally hundreds of cameos, almost 200, I believe, cameos from other games, some that we haven't played in forever, like Jak and Daxter or Sly Cooper. They even threw Bloodborne in there. Do not troll me with that shit. Don't troll me with that shit. We need another Bloodborne. Sony, what are you doing? But that's besides the point. What this game does do, and what I can say best about this game, is that it emphasizes one thing that all games should keep at their core when they're being developed, and that is, this game is just damn fun, man. This game is so fun from start to finish. You're never bored. There are so many different ways of gameplay here. You might be flying in a ship using the motion controls. You might have a general normal platforming part of the game that you've seen in some other 3D platformers. Then you might be going to fight a boss, and many, many, many more here. Every step of this game is just fun, and although it doesn't necessarily do a ton new from other 3D platformers you may have played in the past, it is executed so well in the most polished way possible, utilizing that PlayStation console to the absolute maximum. And on top of that, like I mentioned, it's just fun. I'm not even a huge platformer guy, and I had fun start to finish. There wasn't a second playing this game where I felt bored. Now, going into my number 6 here, a game that wasn't up for the Game of the Year like the last 2 games were, with AstroBot obviously, like I mentioned, winning, we have Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2. Now listen, I wasn't really the biggest Warhammer guy. I hadn't played a lot of Warhammer games. I did play the MMO back in the day because I'm a big MMO guy, and then probably this one, aside from maybe 1 or 2 games here and there leading up to this, so I wasn't really expecting much from this game, although it looked really cool, and I wanted to hop in because of how cool the trailer looked and because of how many other people were telling me that this game was really good. And it's safe to say, I wasn't disappointed. This game had me up all night looking up Warhammer 40k lore videos, and I mean for weeks and weeks straight, all I could do is think about the Warhammer universe. I am fully fully invested now. And that's because how good this game was. Starting off with the campaign, you have so many different melee weapons as well as guns that you can utilize in different ways. There's a parry mechanic, and as a Souls guy, I love parry mechanics. Your actual companions are really damn good and useful in combat as well, and you can revive them, which I always appreciate in games. On top of this, no, the story wasn't amazing, but there's so many different gameplay elements here that you go through that I genuinely had so much fun with that are very different from one another. You might be using a flamethrower to hold off all of these different rats while your companions complete the objective, or your friends complete the objective if you played with other people. On top of this, there's all of these different bosses, some that go completely invisible, and it kind of feels like you're getting attacked by Predator from Alien vs. Predator. On top of this, you might be shooting down all these hordes of Terminids where there's literally hundreds of them coming at you that you have to make sure you stand your ground and hold off. It is just so fun, and the experience as a whole with all of the different boss fights that genuinely do have different mechanics on top of these other gameplay elements as well, on top of it being a relatively hard experience while you go up in difficulty with a lot of different options in combat. I absolutely love the campaign, and this carries over to 2 other modes as well. You even have co-op missions here that you'll unlock as you go through the campaign, because these take part while you're actually going through the campaign as well, and these are actually integral to the story of the game, and you play on them with friends on different difficulties here when you pick a set character or a set class that has set abilities and a couple different guns that they can use where you go in and do this co-op mission. On top of this, they have an online PvP multiplayer mode as well that uses all of those same classes over in the multiplayer, which in my opinion felt like a very standard but a very refreshing multiplayer experience. It didn't try to do too much. It was just fun. It had generic game modes, small maps that you go and you work with your team with pretty damn fun classes. Some with jetpacks, some that could put down shields, some that held a shield and just ran in and really utilized a melee weapon for the most part. You had your snipers as well. You had all of that here, but it didn't try to do too much, but it was just fun. It was a very fun, engaging multiplayer experience that reminded me of playing games back on the Xbox 360 in the best of ways. And when you have a robust customization system for both the co-op mode as well as the PvP mode, that you can change your helmet, your boots, your chest armor, your shoulders, pretty much anything. You can add different trinkets onto them. You can add all of these different emblems, change any color, both secondary, tertiary, and the primary color of all these as well. There's so many different things that you can do here with the customization. It just makes for one of the best and most immersive Warhammer experiences where you can really live in that 40k fantasy. But I will say, when this game came out, the servers were absolutely terrible. It took me hours sometimes to play with friends where I would just write off the entire night just trying to play one co-op campaign mission or one PvP with my friends, and that was horrible, but hopefully they fix that. I actually haven't played the game in a little bit, but if you played the game on launch, you probably remember if you're trying to play with friends. Now, going into number 5 here, we have one that not a lot of people know about, an ARPG called Last Epoch. And the reason I put this so high up is probably a little bit of bias. I'm a huge ARPG fan, so the amount of hours I put into this game was insane, both in beta as well as when the game fully released. But this was the first ARPG that I genuinely felt like was the middle ground between something very casual like Diablo 4 and something very hardcore like Path of Exile 1. I didn't feel like I had to look up a guide to create some character that would actually be able to do the endgame or get through the story without getting one shot or having problems. And granted, all ARPGs have this problem to some extent, because I felt like a lot of the power here was really tied into the different abilities and the ability skill trees that you had. In this game, you didn't have that giant Path of Exile skill tree that seemed overwhelming. You had each individual ability having its own skill tree that would completely change up how that ability worked. For example, me as a minion build, I changed up my minions to make each of them have a specific element, and then I improved with the modifiers on my gear that elemental damage for minions as well as minion damage. The crafting here was also so easy to work with, where you could really craft an item that you actually wanted and would be useful for your character pretty much 50 to 60% of the time, in my opinion. you could put different prefixes or suffixes or modifiers on whatever item that could use those modifiers, and it had a forging potential, which means the more you put on that weapon, the less forging potential you would have. Sometimes it would take none, sometimes it would take a lot, and that's really where all of the RNG relied. If you wanted to put 5 different minion damage bonuses on your item to keep increasing the minion damage on your item, you could do that. It might use all of your fortune potential after one modifier, but you might be able to put all 5 on no problem, and I liked that crafting system a lot. It really revolved on how powerful are you going to make that piece of gear, not necessarily are you going to be able to even have that type of suffix or prefix on your item in the first place. You didn't have to research it to understand it. You didn't have to make all of these different spreadsheets to create a good build. You could just play the game, and I really appreciated that. But again, it also wasn't as simple as a lot of things in Diablo 4, for example, are. On top of this, you did have pretty much everything that a lot of ARPGs have as well. You had your items with all of these different modifiers on them. You had your unique items as well. You have the same style of gameplay, but on top of this, you have really good bosses as well that I genuinely believe had pretty good mechanics. They had an end game that you could put a lot of hours into. It wasn't the greatest end game of all time, but for a small studio making their first ARPG, I thought this was an absolutely incredible experience. And with that being said, of course there are issues here, but I feel like this really set the stage for someone like me to enjoy an ARPG that I didn't have to have this giant uphill battle to finally get into or understand. It was a game that, like I mentioned, I could just hop in and play, test out a bunch of different things, respec at will, and find what build was really going to fit my playstyle, what I enjoyed, and what build was going to be very successful throughout the game and the end game. At its time, it was really my favorite ARPG that was out. I liked it better than Diablo 4, and I liked it better than Path of Exile. Obviously, Path of Exile 2 came out and completely destroyed my life in terms of how much I've been playing that game, but obviously that came out many months after last Epoch, and I really had a great experience here. Now, my next game at number 4, we have Hades 2, which was an early access game that came out earlier this year that has gotten a lot more content since its initial early access release. And with Hades 1 being my favorite roguelike of all time, I had a lot of expectations for Hades 2, even in the early access state, although it might be unfair for me to compare this to all these other games that might have more content. But for the content it did have, I already put like 80 hours into this game. It was so damn good with how polished the experience was. I love the story, I love all the different characters, I love the art style, and obviously the combat feels so good. I don't feel like any other roguelike on the market gives me the replayability that the Hades games do, specifically here in Hades 2. All of the different weapons feel so unique from one another. So when you're playing the game, you're going through all of these different stages, getting all of these different bonuses and benefits to your character, you genuinely sometimes feel like you're playing a whole different game. My favorite weapon was the big, beefy, two-handed Moonlight Axe, and at its core, it was a two-handed weapon, but you have these different moves that you can do with it as well. You can swing it normally, you can actually wind up the axe as a big AoE around you, but then you could get bonuses where you could throw that AoE ahead of you, staying more safe and behind. You could get things where you could wind it up a lot faster. You could obviously increase the hell out of the damage on it. You could freeze people with the AoE that you're throwing throughout the entire map, just crushing all of the different enemies that you're fighting. It felt so good to get all of the bonuses that you want while you're going through the different stages, to get the exact build that you know is the one where you can complete the game, and you're one-shotting the earlier bosses knowing that this might be finally the run where I can beat the last boss. When you finally do beat that boss after hours of dying, getting incremental upgrades every single time, making sure your weapon's stronger, making sure you're able to actually get the bonuses that you want to get when you're hopping back into the game, and you finally take out that last boss. It is so gratifying. And since then, they've dropped so much more content. I believe they put new weapons into the game, an entire overground area where it has completely new bosses and another end game boss that you can fight. They've added new characters, new abilities and trees that you can really go down that are going to change up your game gameplay even more and make the roguelike experience as a whole even better. But overall, even when I was playing it for the first time, before it had a lot of the extra content they added, I already felt like at that point, it was such a great game. It had great story, like I mentioned, very good characters that had their own unique humor to them, all their own personality. The art style was so damn good, like I mentioned as well, and it was such a good, smooth, and polished experience that I genuinely do think it deserves to be this high up on my list. Now, the next game coming in at number 3, no surprise here, we have Metaphor ReFantazio. And before this game released, I genuinely didn't think it was actually going to be on my top 10 list. I didn't expect this game to be as good as it was. But obviously, coming from the team that made the Persona games, this game was going to be good probably regardless. I'm just not a huge fan of those games because I haven't spent time and actually grinded through Persona 3, for example. So a lot of this game and its style was pretty new to me. But I really can't say enough good about this game. Everything about this game was exceptional. The first thing you're going to notice is the music and the art style. And with the art style, it's one of the most unique, cool, and amazing art styles I've ever seen in a video game. Coupling that with the beautiful music scores that they have throughout the entire experience, you are immersed from start to finish in what they have brought here. The characters here are both unique as well as relatable. You enjoy spending time with these characters, talking to them, and getting to know them. The combat in this game was also incredible. Not only the way it looked and the way it felt, but the fact that for smaller enemies, you could go and just have this really kind of action combat style where you could take them out, and then bigger enemies and the really amazing cool boss fights that you took place in the game being this turn-based kind of classic Persona experience that you know and love, coupled with the great art style within the menus and your attacks as well. It just was always a solid experience from start to finish. And obviously, turn-based can't do too much to differ from other turn-based games, but in this game, I do feel like the combat felt like an evolution from some of the previous games they worked on, as well as some other standard turn-based games from other developers. On top of this, the story in this game doesn't treat you like you're a kid or you can't understand what's going on. There was a lot of political nuance here that a lot of games don't dare to go into that realm, but this game did it so damn well. And for a game to come out not even necessarily have the gameplay style that I super enjoy in RPGs, and surprise me this much, a game that I could sink even 100 more hours into and never have the feeling of being bored and not having fun and not enjoying, again, spending time in this world with this art style, with these characters and this music. I think it definitely, easily deserves a top 3 spot for me. This was one of the best RPGs of the year, hands down, and is a must play for any RPG fan. Even if you do not like turn-based combat, it's that good. And now, going into number 2, we have another ARPG on the list. And this is the early access for Path of Exile 2, and I understand it's early access, but similar to Hades, you can easily put 80 hours, you can put hundreds and hundreds of hours into this game, and still be potentially not experiencing everything just the early access has to offer. But Path of Exile 2, and why I like it so much, is because it kind of does a similar thing to last Epoch, where it doesn't rely on the player having to get to this uphill battle to learn all the mechanics and look up guides and all these different spreadsheets. And granted, that is still there and available for Path of Exile 2. A lot of the hardcore blasters on YouTube are doing that right now. However, it aimed to get a more casual player into these games and be able to understand it from the ground up. And it did this by changing the way skills work to where all you need now is skill gems that you can put support skill gems on to completely change the way that these skills work. You don't have to rely on all these specific links on your different gear to where it felt like if those didn't drop with that and you didn't get the right crafting materials, you couldn't even use a really good piece of armor that you just had drop for you. You aren't locked into all of the different passives that you choose in this game. So that overwhelming passive skill tree to where you sometimes can get locked into what you do and completely brick your character in the original game, you can now respec at will just for gold. And they already reduced the gold cost for this, so it's pretty easy to do this at any stage of the game. Now, they also changed a lot of other things here. They definitely made the campaign a lot more difficult, especially for certain builds in this game, which is something I really enjoyed. I enjoyed learning the bosses and having to take context clues of the different enemies that I'm about to fight so I don't get hit by the different attacks that I should know are coming. For example, if a dude is holding a giant hammer, he's going to do a slam, and it's going to probably do an area of effect attack that's going to hit your character if you don't move out of the way. If there's these little orbs that are coming up that are pulsing, they're probably going to get you and explode. And they do a really good job with just the environments as a whole and the context clues of the different enemies, as well as with bosses that have so many different mechanics to them, at least in regards to other ARPGs out there in the genre. On top of this, the combat feels so good. I cannot stress this enough. It is crunchy, it is weighty, it is impactful. Every enemy that you are crushing and you're one-shotting just feels so good. It's this addicting feeling that you can't stop just getting more powerful, getting your character to one-shot anything that it sees, and just making the most overpowered build as possible. They also put a lot of the money they made from Path of Exile 1 to making this game be presented in such a good way. The environments are gritty. They're absolutely beautiful. You have a lot more actual story here that is pretty engaging and characters that are pretty damn engaging. I could see people playing this game just solely for the campaign. In almost every other ARPG, you're just trying to get past it as soon as possible to get to the end game. And this game already also has a big end game that you can take part in even in the early access. Now, it does have problems with it. It's not the perfect end game that a lot of people wanted. Granted, it's early access. They're still making a lot of changes here, but you can still put 10, 50, 100 hours into this end game and still not experience the big uber or pinnacle bosses that this game has set for you. The end game pretty much revolves around you putting a waypoint that has different modifiers into a map, which also can have different modifiers already onto it. So you basically go, you have to kill all the different rares, some have bosses on it, and then you complete it, you get the loot. It has a bunch of different league mechanics that you've seen in Path of Exile 1 that can also be modifiers on these different maps, and you kind of just go through the map like that and continuously progress until you find the citadels that have the uber bosses. You kill 3 of those, and then you kill the pinnacle boss. But after like 100 hours, 150 hours playing this game, I haven't even found one citadel, so that's definitely something they need to change or explain how the hell you find one of those. You also have 2 different trials in this game, which is going to allow you to unlock and improve your ascended class. So for example, if you're a witch, you can turn into an infernalist or a blood mage that has a new passive tree that you can really refine your build around. Now granted, these trials as well need a lot of work to them right now in terms of the overall balance, but the fact that you have these trials, you have an entire campaign with 3 acts in a cruel mode where you play those 3 acts again, an end game you can put countless number of hours into, pinnacle bosses already, and a ton of other bosses that have very unique mechanics to each other in the game as well. This game has so much content already there for the player that wants to hop in, and it's more accessible to play Path of Exile than ever was before. By the time the game launches, probably later in 2025, there's going to be more classes, more subclasses and ascendancies. The second 3 acts in the game are going to be released, so no longer is there going to be a crew mode, you're going to play these other 3 acts. There's going to be a lot of changes to different trials and endgame. I'm sure they're going to add more modifiers and league mechanics as well. So there's going to be so many more different things here when the game actually releases that I can't wait to experience for the first time, especially those next 3 acts, because the campaign was an S-tier experience in this game. I could go in for hours about how much I enjoy this game and the specifics of all of the different systems in the game and all of the different gameplay mechanics, as well as how much I do think this game needs to improve in certain aspects. But for what it already is, it's easily my second favorite game that I have played this year, hands down. And I genuinely think this already has the foundation to be probably the best ARPG that has ever been made. And now going into my number 1 game of 2024. If you followed this channel, you probably already know what I'm going to say. It is Black Myth Wukong. And this game, from Game Science, had some of the biggest expectations I've ever seen for a game that was pretty much the first AAA game made by a studio. The trailers made this game look so good from years ago that everybody was excited for what this game actually was going to be or what this game actually had to offer. When this game came out, It exceeded almost every expectation that I had for it, even though I was already expecting the world because of what we've seen. And I might be a bit biased here. I'm someone who loves Souls games, and although this game wasn't necessarily a Souls game, it had a ton of different Souls mechanics, I definitely felt at home when playing this game because of all of those different mechanics that I was already relatively familiar with. But coupling this familiarity with an extremely fast-paced combat that had a ton of different combos, that had a ton of different weapons and armor pieces that you could craft a specific build with, a robust skill tree that you could respec at any time depending on what boss you were fighting, hundreds of different bosses that all had unique mechanics, that almost none of them were reskinned from a different boss, and if they were, they still felt like a whole new boss experience. Beautiful environments where the further you went through the game, the more these environments actually opened up and the more you could do, to the point where you're at the end of the game and you're flying around on Wukong's cloud. They obviously knew what the hell they were doing with how they styled the whole progression in this game, aside from just progressing your character. Every single chapter felt different from the previous one. It opened up, it allowed you to do more as a character, it brought you more gameplay mechanics to where the game never felt stale. On top of this, the story here was brought in so many cool different ways, where you go through an act and then you have a big cutscene that could be stop motion animation or a full-on anime cutscene. It was so damn cool, it was so unique, and I actually really enjoyed the story and a lot of the different characters that were actually in this game. Everything in this game was borderline S tier or even better in some aspects. All of the different big bosses felt so cinematic, they felt so good, and there were so many of them again, like I mentioned. It genuinely almost felt like a boss rush at times. It wasn't, but it definitely could feel like that, and I wasn't mad about that at all, because my favorite thing in these type of games are the boss fights. And again, there was just hundreds of them to pick from that all felt unique from each other. Now, I will say there was one thing that wasn't S tier about this game, and in my opinion, that's the exploration. There was a ton of invisible walls that you actually thought you could go to a certain location and you couldn't, and that was definitely a big bummer. But aside from that, the rest of the game was amazing, and they definitely, again, opened up the game more as you went through it, especially in the last chapter, in Chapter 6, where you could literally fly around and go pretty much anywhere you could see. So they made that better. I'm hoping in future DLCs or the next game that they release, they can fix this problem, because everything else was amazing. If they coupled this with an experience similar to something like Elden Ring, where you really can go anywhere you see, this could literally have been one of the greatest games of all time. But enough glazing finally for 2024, because these were my top 10 best games of this year. Now, there were a lot of honorable mentions because it was hard, and like I mentioned at the start of the video, there was a lot of other games that I really enjoyed that I wanted to also put on this list that I want to quickly mention. You had Balatro, a game that I just didn't play enough of to put it on this list, but if I did, easily could be there. It was a game that really sparked why independent studios were pretty much beating AAA studios at their own game by just releasing really fun, engaging, unique experiences. You obviously had Shadows of the Erdtree for Elden Ring, but I didn't put that on here even though it's as big as a full game. It had the foundation of Elden Ring. It's a DLC. I didn't think it was fair to put on here. You had Stellar Blade with the sexiest main character of all time, but also with great gameplay and great music that I really enjoyed. Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, an Ubisoft game that actually was good. Too bad they disbanded the studio because it was the highest rated Ubisoft game in the last decade. Palworld, I mean, a unique take on Pokemon. Please don't get sued to shit. We love you, Palworld. We love you. On top of that, Dragon Ball Sparking Zero. I'm not a huge fighting game guy, but this game was amazing. I had a lot of fun reliving all of these characters in the Dragon Ball universe. I'm a huge anime guy, and although this game isn't ever balanced, it's not going to always or ever have that really big competitive scene. It was such a fun game. And last but not least, Marvel Rivals, a game that came out very recently that's low-key just an Overwatch clone with a lot more characters, but I really enjoy that game. It does what it does really, really, really well, and it's so fun to play those different Marvel characters with my friends and pop off in, you know, the same type of gameplay style as Team Fortress and Overwatch. But that concludes my 10 best games of 2024. It was a long one. I appreciate you guys. If you did stick to the end of this, I really appreciate all the support you guys have given me this year as a whole. So again, if you are new to the channel, you like this video, please like this video, subscribe for more content like this, as well as gaming news. That's going to be coming soon into the new year. I'm going to be releasing a video every day and hopefully streaming every day, as well as posting clips. I've been slacking a little bit off on streaming and posting clips just because of how much effort I've been trying to put into my videos. I've had a lot of family time as well around the holidays, so I'm going to get back to that. But I appreciate you guys. Again, like and subscribe. I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.